Hello and welcome to another episode of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and you're listening to episode 132 with C. Kim Miles, ASC, CSC, MYSC, DP of Still, the Michael J. Fox movie. Enjoy. So you said you were working on a feature?
Yeah, a little Lionsgate feature based on the book that people love, I guess, called The Best Christmas Pageant Ever. Which sounds like a Hallmark movie, but hopefully it doesn't turn out that way.
Come off this one. I was normally I ask, what have you been watching? But I assume as you're working, it's pretty hard to just sit down and catch a flick or whatever.
Yeah, I've actually, I'm trying to decide what to go see this afternoon. I might go see Night Swim of all things, but what have I been watching? What was I can't remember the latest one was probably like The Holdovers. And I think last week we went and saw, clearly it was a huge impression on me. I can't even think what we saw last week, but it was good.
Dude, I'll watch, like, sometimes I just go on a rip and I'll watch like 3 movies in a row. And then my girlfriend will be like, "What'd you do today?" And I'm like, "I watched,
No idea. I've been catching up. I've for a long time not seen Succession, so I've been catching up on that on the couch, and enjoying that a lot. And just midway through season 3 right now. So that's been sort of the focus lately.
Sure. Yeah. At the time of this episode's release, which will be dating it a little bit, my interview with Eigil Berld, who shot The Holdovers, just came out.
Yeah. Oh, right on.
I not only is it like one of my favorite movies of last year, just period, but that they achieved set, like, whenever people go, "Oh, I want it to look like film," I just have something to point to. It's like, do you want it to look like that, or do you want it to look like your memory of like blockbuster films or something? Because there's a difference. That's what film looked like.
Yeah. I thought it looked great. I was convinced. I went with my camera operator, and that's on this show with me, and we came out of it going, "Wow, I guess they shot on 16. It looked like it's like they shot on film." So, yeah, no, great job.
Yeah, you should go listen to it. But the short of it was basically they tested everything, and they were like, "Fuck, if we shoot like normal film, like 16's too dirty, but if they shoot 35, it's like meant to be scanned anyway, so they'd be adding grain."
Right.
So they're like, "Fuck it, just shoot digital. Like, why are we trying to overcomplicate this?"
And then you can control it like down to the pixel, right?
Yeah.
For sure.
I did see in your little CV there on your website that you started, your major was in fine art photography.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk to me about how you got to that point, and also what effect, because like fine art photography is so much more different than like documentary or even certain like commercial stuff, and it is so subjective. I'm always fascinated to hear when people work in that at that level. My sister's degree is in fine art as well, so.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, it was kind of a misstep in a lot of ways, I think. The way it all started was I grew up in Malaysia, and the company that I started working for in Malaysia belonged to the parents of a very good friend of mine, and his dad was a still photographer, and that's how that company got started. He was a still photographer, and then they discovered that there was more money to be made, I guess. There's a better business model to be in film. So he had kind of shelved the still photography side of the business and focused on motion picture, and it was all commercials and stuff like that. It wasn't anything, no narrative stuff. So when it came time for me to go to college, he had said, Henry, the dad, had said, "Look, maybe there's an opportunity for us to get the still photography side of things going again. And so maybe that, if you're going to go, pick something to study, maybe that's what you should do." And I looked at a few schools. The one I really wanted was RMIT, the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology in Melbourne, Australia. They have a great commercial photography program there. But I was 16 or 17, I think, and my girlfriend was going to Vancouver. So I looked around Vancouver and said, "Well, that one's got sort of a photography thing. Maybe I'll start there and then work my way somewhere else. And I never ended up going anywhere else. I went to UVic, the University of Victoria, and ended up staying there. So midway through the whole thing, I was pretty disillusioned with it. I'm like, this is a degree to be an artist, which is sort of, it's so counterintuitive that
Right.
It doesn't really make any sense. And our without mentioning names, I felt like our instructors had a very select group of favorites that got all the all the critique time and stuff. Sure, the whole thing wasn't really a huge deal for me, and I was pulling focus and doing that sort of thing on weekends, but during summers stuff, I would go back to Malaysia and work. So photography thing was going on. I was always kind of in the film side of things, and it never really kind of amounted to anything. Now it's come full circle because I get to put photos up at the ASC clubhouse once in a while,
Right.
or members photography. But I just don't take a lot of stills anymore. I go on these little spurts, like for example, now I'm out of town, so maybe I'll run around a little bit and shoot some stills just because it's something new. But then it kind of comes in fits and spurts, and I don't really, I'm not dedicated to running around shooting stills like some of my contemporaries, like David Mullen, for example. I don't know how David finds enough hours in the day to do everything that he does between the blogs and the cinematography forum and shooting stills and shooting Mrs. Maisel and he's a pretty inspiring kind of guy. But so the stills is kind of more I wouldn't even say it's a hobby. It's just something that's kind of fun once in a while and doesn't really have a huge bearing on my life.
Yeah. Did that education affect your kind of your eye for framing or anything like that, or was it potentially more like conceptual?
It was more conceptual, and the whole thing was such a disillusionment for me that I didn't feel like I took a lot away from it at all. I'd already been shooting stills as a kid. My mom was into photography, not in a super fine artsy kind of way, but I think that's what sort of got my attention on cameras at first. And I'm kind of, I'm a nerd like everybody else that does my job. And the technology, the cameras, all that stuff was the sort of physical side of it that was interesting to me, So I'd always kind of dabbled with it. And I don't feel like I really took a whole lot away from going to university. And things like framing aesthetic and that sort of thing are things that have just sort of developed over time. And I'm constantly learning, and we're all constantly learning about new aesthetics and how to push the boundaries and how to, what the rules are, knowing how to break the rules and that sort of thing. And I think I've learned it all, just by trial and error and being at work and learning from the people around me. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you had I was also checking out, you got to do some research, and your IMDb's long as shit, man. Like, you got so many projects under your belt. And I was wondering, like, did you see kind of a through line with that? Because I know in a different interview you had said you'd done a lot of like picture of the weeks or whatever you wanted to call them,
Yeah.
And I always say, like, even like Hallmark movies, I'm always like, I'd love to do that. It looks like fun. I'm sure it's quick. I'm sure everyone loves each other.
Yeah.
Stuff like that is rad. Great place to cut your teeth.
100%, and people look down on the. In fact, I made a joke about Hallmark movies just now with
Right.
this Badger movie. I'm like, it's people tend to be snotty and look down on those movies as though they're somehow of a different tier of movie, and I suppose they are in a way that they're certainly a different tier of A rate. But you know what? They're great. They're a great proving ground. I did 35 or 36 of those movie of the week type, lifetime thrillers and Hallmark Christmas movies and stuff like that. And I was always trying to push the envelope and make them look different, make them look like a bigger movie than they were. And I was lucky enough to have directors that felt the same way, that weren't just there, phoning it in. And through that process of working those movies, we discovered that, you don't have the studio looking over your shoulder the whole time. You don't have a whole bunch of executives that are constantly scrutinizing dailies and making notes. So you can get away with a little bit more than you can, on a studio picture. And it was a really great kind of proving ground, a great place to learn and push the envelope and kind of find where the boundaries of what you can get away with were. So I'm grateful for the time that I did those. They kept food on the table when the time was there, and they built my resume like super, super fast. I would do probably 8 or 10 of those a year. Maybe not, but 6 and 8 of them maybe a year. 15-day movies. Some of them were 8-day movies, which was kind of crazy. But each one I like to think I learned something from and took something away from that I could then apply and amplify and help with the next one. It was lots of fun. Made a lot of good friends and some long enduring relationships out of those movies for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I always tell like students, because, I suppose part of my job is education. Like I always tell students, you're not going to get out of here and go make following for your first film or go, you're going to shoot 600 commercials if you're lucky. And like the way to get, you don't graduate film school and then suddenly you're a DP or a director or whatever it may be.
True.
And when I finally internalized that as a kid, I definitely was like, my perspective on, like you said, people look down on certain, I don't look down on anything more, especially I had to realize that some movies aren't made for me.
Yeah.
I think a lot of consumers of movies and television think that everything is supposed to be for them. And if they don't get it,
Yeah, it's true. It's very true. And it's hard to, you see it every time you try to find something to watch on Netflix, when you go, oh, I don't know about that. I'm not looking at that. That looks terrible. And then on the occasional moment when you actually land on something that you wouldn't normally watch, I always find I'm like, oh, this is a really good story. Or, there's always stuff hidden that isn't what you naturally gravitate towards. And that's part of the fun, right?
Yeah, I was
like, I mean, like this whole thing of doing a Christmas movie, it's not my instinct. It's not the first choice. I wouldn't want to, jump out of bed to go do a Christmas movie, but this one was right, at the time. And it's a great story and people know the book. And, I've time and again, I've said to people, what are you working on right now? And I'm like, and I'll kind of bubble out our best Christmas present ever. And 9 times out of 10 people go, based on the book, I love that book. My parents used to read that to me when I was a kid. So it's something that's meaningful to some people. So hopefully that resonates. Maybe.
Totally. I was going to say, last night I watched Green Mile and then Contact.
Yeah.
And I was just sitting there thinking, going like, man, you could sneak someone into either of these films and not tell them how it ends up. And they will either love that or hate it. Green Mile especially, it doesn't start getting weird until like 45 minutes left in the movie.
Right. Yeah. It's so great though. It's such a great film. And it's all performance. I think both those films are just performance, character driven performance. And it's so Contact is one of my favorites, Leonard Bob's.
I fucking love that movie. Oh, and you worked with Bob's. I didn't even think about that. You worked with him on, what was it, Marwin?
Welcome to Marwin, yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I caught that one in theaters. I remember.
Well, it's it. Yeah, it was interesting.
Sure.
I don't think it got where it needed to go in terms of in terms of how it ended up editorially but far be it from me to criticize that sort of thing. That's well above my pay grade. So.
Yeah. Well, that was the one where Steve Carell was in it, right? And then he he was like, he had toys that would come to life or some.
Yeah. He was.
My memory worked.
A great story. Yeah, right. It was a great story. That it was on a documentary entitled Marwin Call, and Steve Carell's character was a fellow named Mark Bogenkamp, who was beaten nearly to death for admitting that he liked wearing women's shoes in upstate New York. And the real character, Mark, had to relearn, how to eat and how to speak after his beating. He was so severely beaten up. and the real character is really angry and really kind of disappointed in the world, and that didn't really, again, far be it from me to talk about performance, but it felt like that was an element that was missing from that movie, and it, it kind of, for me, fell a little short that way. Oh boy, I hope I don't regret saying all that. But anyway,
well, I think it's far enough along. I think everyone's opinions about, especially like, I thought about that with this podcast, is like how I would never say anything, but like I do feel bad when you can, like, not everything, we all know not everything's amazing. Like if we're, how are we going to learn from each other's mistakes if we all pretend that, not that, that's a cinematography mistake there, but, you got to be a little open about it.
100%. And that was the first of like a sort of decent sized studio picture for me. So there was a lot of new ground that I was exposing myself to in terms of the politics of the studio. And I'm not saying that there was a lot of studio interference anyway,
right?
Because it was Bob Z, and who's going to tell Bob Z what to do? And rightfully so. So that was an interesting kind of break into that. It was nice to kind of break into the studio side of things with the almost with the protection or under the wing of Bob Z to kind of insulate me from the politics of it.
Right.
So it was nice to have some confidence and not be second guessing everything I was doing because he was there.
Sure. That splits me into two thoughts. So I've said this a million times this season. I started taking notes, so I'll remember instead of just jumping around and going, oh. But the first one was before we got away from it. Doing all those quicker films. What were some of the things that you learned that allow you to shoot an 8-day film? Like some of the maybe like lighting tricks or even managerial tricks, or what was it? Yeah, how were you able to stay efficient?
Yeah, well, great question. You need to be ahead of the game all the time, and always thinking about the next. Where are we after we're done the scene? What room are we in? What location are we in? Are we doing a company move? So there's always, you have to stay ahead of it so that when you get there, you've thought it out already, and it's you can kind of slip into it rather than sort of discovering every new location as you go along. It's one of the things that I took away from it was I tend not to like shows like TV shows, and that's kind of a broad thing to say, but I don't over light, I don't beauty light close up, every single time unless there's a narrative reason to do so. And I think I'm willing to take a few more chances with actors playing on the dark side and not being, just by virtue of not beauty lighting everything, you get to save a little bit of time. And that's not the reason that I don't do a lot of beauty lighting. It's just that I like stuff that feels real and honest, and the world's never perfect, and manufacturing perfect lighting for close-ups to me takes me out of the story, takes me out of the narrative. So I think embracing that and talking directors into saying, hey, or talking directors into letting a scene play in silhouette or letting it play in a crosslight, not only keeps it more alive and keeps it more real, but it allows you to save some time on set. So I developed a habit of looking at locations and or studio sets and working with directors early to devise blockings that allow us to maximize the natural advantages of those locations or sets, so that we're not fighting the location, for every shot. We're not trying to manufacture light that's coming from a place where it doesn't naturally occur in the set.
Right.
So I think it's kind of maybe there's I didn't come from documentaries, but there's kind of a documentary approach to that in a way. I'm a huge fan of people like Barry Ackroyd that from that documentary world, and you're forced by budget and schedule and not knowing what's going to happen in the next 10 minutes with your subject matter to embrace what's happening around you to make the best of it. And I think that's a huge part of making those movies successful, is being able to sort of take advantage of and amplify what's already happened rather than trying to fight it and manufacture something that isn't already going on. And then that translated well into television. You know, when we're doing 7 pages a day on something like The Flash or Arrow, and
Right.
you know, always same principle, stay 1 or 2 sets ahead so that your rigging guys are lighting other sets while you're shooting this one, and staging, staging blocking so that you can take advantage of what the sets offer naturally, you know, and it's all of that, all those efficiencies that you kind of learn to take into stride. In fact, it's gotten to the point where when we're on a feature and we're shooting a page and a half a day, I find myself having to slow down and say, look, let's stop for a second and, you know, throw the anchor out and see what we can improve, you know, instead of accepting things. Let's see what we can do to make things a little bit more, you know, a little bit more perfect or a little bit more interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always a balancing.
Yeah. I imagine when suddenly you have an 8 times less stuff to do, you start getting anxious. Like, what did I forget? You know?
Well, it's like, what should I be doing right now? I feel like I should be doing something. But I know the first AD on Marwen was the most amazing assistant director I've ever worked with. His name's Lee Grummett. He's from the UK. He's done a lot of Bob's, if not all of Bob's most recent movies, along with a bunch of stuff with Ridley Scott. I just saw something that George Clooney movie, Boys in the Boat.
Yeah.
I saw
My friend's dad saw that.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. I saw Lee's name at the end of that, and I was like, oh, I know that guy. But Lee pulled me aside at the end of Marwen and said, hey, you know, so do you mind if I offer a word of advice? I said, absolutely not. And he said, look, he goes, I know there were times during the show when you said you were ready, and I think you would have liked to have had another 15 minutes or another 20 minutes to make something better. And I said, well, yeah, but you know, that's always the case. Like, you know, if you're going to give me another 20 minutes, I'm always going to find something to do. But you know, we've got to make our day, and we've got to get the pages. And he said, no. He goes, no. He goes, at this level, it's all about the picture. And if there's anything that you need, just come and tell me. Or if you want to do something better, if you think it could be, you know, I wish I had another 20 minutes, just come and tell me, and I'll make up some excuse if I need to buy that time for you. But he said, but at this level, it's all about the picture, and it needs to be exactly the way you want it, and you shouldn't be compromising for time or anything. So that was a really interesting thing for him to say, and very gracious of him. No other AD has ever said that.
Right.
He said,
they're like, 20 minutes too long all the time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm reminded a great AD is fucking invaluable. I'm reminded of, I think it was Gareth Evans was saying that, like, you'd be sitting there for an hour and someone would be moving cable, and then you'd start filming, and like 3 minutes into the take, people are like, come on, dude.
Yeah.
We gotta go. It's like, the cable got an hour. What?
It's true. Gareth, that's awesome. Well, yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
But you know, and you know, occasionally you have directors come up and go, "What are we doing? What are we?" And you can overhear the director and the AD talk, "What are we doing? What are we waiting for?" And I remember when I was directing my first episode of The Flash, you know, you go through there's a lot going on in your head, and you know, you'd block a scene and work it out with the cast, then you'd have your little conversations with them, then you'd have the floor over to lighting, and the lighting guys start working. And if you don't have a lot of stuff to work through, as a director, you're kind of sitting at the monitor, you know, twiddling your thumbs. And after like 2 or 3 minutes, I'm like, what are we doing? Like, what's happening? Why is this taking so long? It's like, it's only been 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Get this man a
It's
Game
funny.
Boy.
Exactly. Yeah, a fidget spinner or something. Yeah, there's their perception of time changes based on what your job responsibilities are.
Sure. I did want to ask, because this actually kind of fits nicely with that, is on the sort of smaller films and then into the larger films. This is kind of a generalized question that I've just wanted to ask someone, and I keep kind of forgetting to do it directly. And that is, from a managerial side, how are you, you know, with the film of the week type movies, are you getting like a new crew every time? Like, I assume there's a lot of turnover. Not because people are getting fired, but that's a lot of gigs to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of that sort of moving up through the ranks business that's going on these days. No, when I did those, I think the last one of those that I did was probably back in 2012 or so. So it's been a while since I've done those, but no, I would kind of roll my crew through from one to the next because it was such consistent work. They were able to just we were able to all kind of stick together and do that. And it's the same's true now. I like when I come to Winnipeg, I have the crew that I like to use here. And when I'm in LA, there's always kind of a core group of people that you trust, that whose performance you can count on the day. Sometimes you're discovering new people for sure, but I try to roll crew over as much as I can because it's just one less variable totally when you're particularly with gaffers and camera operators.
Yeah. Well, I guess the modification to that question is, even if they're not new, like what kind of what are some of the challenges and things that you kind of learned being a manager? Because I think a lot of cinematography podcasts don't quite talk about the head of department side of things, at least. And then I realized I don't do it. So I'd kind of like to know, I know I had a few leadership positions in my college and outside of college, and I fucking blew it. I blew it so hard, and even now I get like a little, or even not being, having been a leader in certain senses, and then having to go back and maybe work for a leader who's not good at their job, and I have to really stop myself from going come here, So what are those kind of things you've run into and looked from?
Well, that's always a balancing act. It's I'm a strong believer in and this is a fading trend these days. I'm a strong believer in putting your time in and being there and doing it. I started as a grip. I pestered my way into the camera department. I worked through the camera department. I started shooting stuff before I thought I was ready to shoot stuff because a director kind of forced my hand a little bit, which was great. And I'm grateful forever for that. But, and then I gaffed stuff after I started shooting, which was really kind of a backward step. But that was because I moved back to Canada and nobody would take me seriously as a DP. So, but every step of it has always turned out to be good. Even steps that have felt like I was going backwards at the time have always turned out to be the proper way that it should have turned out. My Canadian always says everything happens for a reason, and even though it feels like it's going sideways right now, you'll look back on this and at some point and you'll be like, oh, okay, that's why that happened. And that's something that's been true my entire life. Maybe that's just rose-colored glasses in hindsight, but
power of positive.
Yeah, but I think a huge part of management is knowing who you're managing and understanding what you're asking your crew to do, and understanding and then on going the other direction, understanding what you're asking the director to accommodate, or asking the director to compromise on in order to make your day or to get a shot the way you particularly want. So there's always the most important thing is the kind of out of body perspective, and being able to kind of take yourself out of your position and look at the problems that you're dealing with from everybody else's perspective. I think that's probably the most important thing in terms of keeping everybody motivated and keeping everybody forging ahead to the same goal all the time. I can't, there's so much frustration from time to time these days where you come across people in higher positions, be they directors, producers, whatever, that have kind of ridden the rapid bus to their job,
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say that that's wrong. It's just, if you have the opportunity to direct something and you've never done it before because you were a writer or because you were an editor or whatever, that's great. I'm delighted to support that. I'm super happy to help you find the way and make your episode or your movie or whatever it is as good as it can be. But that has to come with humility, and you have to be willing to say, look, I'm new to this. And you guys amongst you, like when I have my sort of A crew on set in Vancouver, any director could look around and go, you know what, there's like 350 years of on-set experience around me that I can draw from to make this episode or this movie as good as it can be. Or I can pretend I know everything and dismiss all of their input, and we can struggle through every moment of the production. So I think there's while I'm supportive of people that get breaks, it's important to have humility when you get those breaks and take advantage of all the stuff around you that's available. If you give everyone around you ownership of the movie, then you get 150% more performance from them. If they all feel they have something at stake rather than just being told what they're doing, it's so much more rewarding for everyone.
Yeah.
And in television, you get a lot of directors that are moving up through the ranks very rapidly. And when you have the occasional one that really isn't up to the task, it becomes very clear very early, and people like the DP and the script supervisor and the first AD aren't going to let the show tank, so they step up, and sometimes it gets combative on set. When you have a director that doesn't really want to comply with what the show is accustomed to doing, but those three people usually push forward and push hard collectively to get the show made the way the show needs to be made. And then the double-edged sword of that is the producers see the cut and they go, great, that's exactly what we wanted to director again. And then you're just like, oh no.
Right.
So taking advantage of those opportunities to learn, to absorb the knowledge of everyone around you is super, super critical and super important to develop a managerial style that works. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all just telling stories, so none of it's not like storming the front lines in Ukraine or something like that. We're just telling stories, and why make that hard? And why not just learn from it and we can all move forward together?
Yeah.
Quite a diatribe.
No, what did I say at the beginning, man? This is the diatribe show. I did want to kind of know what that transition then was like for you, going into Arrow and then The Flash, which I did watch a lot of Arrow when it was coming out. I didn't catch up on The Flash ever. I kind of fell out of superhero zone earlier. But did you run in that situation where there was like a lot more experience on those sets, or were you bringing that aforementioned day crew, or how was that for you?
Yeah, no. Arrow was sort of my first break into full on full scale network television. And Arrow was at that was the time when the Arrowverse was still coming in with prominence, and right. The show hot, and it was it's a good show. And Glenn, yeah, it was great. It was a lot of, it was right up my alley too. The dark, the mysterious. I love doing dark stuff.
Yeah,
I love being out at the middle of the night every day. But
sure.
But Glenn Winter, who was the DP that started that show, had started directing. He called me, said, "You want to come? I'm directing an episode. You want to come and shoot it?" And I was like, "How do you?" Yeah. And I, to this day, don't know why it came to me. I think it was because a mutual friend of ours was a camera assistant on a show that I did here in Winnipeg, or operator rather, on a show I did here in Winnipeg. And I think he reported back to Glenn and said, to get this. I remember the first day on set, or in prep on Arrow. We were in the concept meeting. It was 9:00 on a Monday morning or something. And everybody else in the room had been on the show for a whole season. And I'm the outsider. And I remember sitting there, and it felt like standing next to the railroad tracks, and there's an Amtrak going by at about 75 miles an hour. And you're kind of just looking down the railway, thinking, there's got to be something coming that I can grab onto and, and get on board this thing.
Right.
So it was really just jumping in the deep end and getting, so it was a huge, but luckily, again, like having Bob with studio shows, having Glenn there, because he was the DP show to that, him say, "Don't worry about it. Like, if we get, well, yeah, there's, that was such a huge comfort factor, I think, for me on that show, knowing that I could go to Glenn and go, how do I fix this problem, or how do I anticipate that? And he was actually really great with really building that notion of stay a set or two ahead, always be a set or two ahead. For if you're lit and we're waiting for cast, let's walk over to the next location and have a look through there and make sure that everything's going the way we need it to. So he was super, super influential in how I approached those Warner Brothers shows. I kind of modeled everything I did on how I learned it from him. So yeah, it was I never had, with some small exceptions, I never had a rigging crew. And on Arrow, on those, you have to have a full-time rigging crew, right?
Right.
And I remember the rigging breakdown came in showed up on my desk on that first episode of Arrow. And I'm looking through and I'm like, there's 56, like an 8-day episode. We have 50 mandates just for electric rigging. I haven't even seen the grip one yet. 56 mandates for electric rigging. And I thought, how do I can't go have this conversation. What do I do? So I just ignored it. I'm like, I'm going to put it over there and talk about it later, and avoid the production manager. Don't talk to the line producer. Just, don't make eye contact. And eventually we got deeper into prep, and Todd Pitts and the line producer came into my office about something else. And I thought, well, I've got to address this. So I said, hey, Todd, have you seen the electric rigging breakdown? He's like, yeah. And I was like, it's okay. He's like, oh, it seems big, doesn't it? I'm like, well, kind of. He goes, yeah, that's how it goes around here. And that was the end of the conversation. I was like, all right, okay, so that's how it goes. So that was a real culture shock for me. Was all of a sudden having producers that I don't want to say producers that understood the needs of the production, but producers that were able to that had the means and the budget that they could address rigging needs and things like that. I mean, there were, I want to be careful about saying that, because it wasn't like the movie of the week producers didn't understand the need for it. It's just, there's only so much money, right?
Yeah. I didn't take it that way. I don't think anyone else
did. Yeah. So that was the whole thing. And that was like stepping up to another level of, okay, this is what it takes to stay ahead. This is what it takes to shoot a schedule like Arrow had, where we're doing 7-day or 8-day episodes that are full of action and full of stunts and full of VFX. That's what it takes to make that machine work. There's the old adage, I'm sure you've heard, there's good, fast, and cheap, right? You can pick any two of those.
Right.
And it was never more obvious than on that show. And then since then, like going on to the movie with Bob Zemeckis, and working with the designer really closely and building a lot of that movie takes place in Mark Hogenkamp's trailer. He lives in a like a double wide kind of, well, it wasn't even double wide, just a regular trailer. And we knew that we wanted to be moving the camera a lot. We knew that we didn't want to be building dance floor and putting cameras on dollies and fighting for space. And so, and Bob being Bob, we knew that a Technocrane was going to play a lot. In fact, I remember having a conversation with Cheryl Ann Martin, one of the producers, and we were talking about Technocranes, and we had I think it was a 45-day or 50-day shooting schedule in that movie. And she's like, okay, so we need to pick what days we have Technos. I was like, okay, I'll figure it out with Bob. And before the conversation was even over, she's like, you know what? It's Bob. So we're going to have a Technocrane. He's going to want it every day. So let's just put it on Run a Show, and we'll figure out where to find the money from later.
Right.
So that, all of a sudden now we've got Run a Show, Techno 30, Run a Show, Techno 50, So going back to the working with Stefan, the designer, so we're building this trailer on stage and knowing that we're probably going to live on the Techno as much as we can. So what do we need to do to this set to build it in such a way that we can swing a Technocrane in here and not have to wild or how do we wild the walls in this place so that they're quick and efficient and we can turn around in 15 minutes. And so the answer was to build all the walls on a guillotine kind of structure. So our rigging grips together with construction. So everything was on a guillotine kind of rig. So if we needed that wall out, we just roll it up, bring the Techno in, set the shot up, do whatever we needed, take the Techno up, put that wall down, take the other one out, turn around. So it was super efficient, super smart. It was expensive as heck, but
Sure.
it did the job. Um, that movie, that trailer that Mark lives in that movie exists in the world across the street from this little gingerbread house that his love interest moves into. So we were scouting locations for that, and Bob hadn't shown up in town yet. It was just myself and Stefan, the designer, and we decided to meet at this place and look at this location. And I'm thinking, gosh, where are we going to find a trailer park across the street from this gingerbread house that are, and we get to this location and they're just open fields. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And Stefan goes, yeah, we'll build a trailer here and we'll build a house there. I'm like, oh, that's how it works over here, right? Okay. So what we did that. We built the exterior there, and then Bob doesn't like shooting outdoors. If we can avoid shooting outdoors, that's the way we go, because it's the control. You can't predict what the weather's going to do. You can't. So the each was that to build the locations again on stage. So we had not just interiors, but exteriors of the trailer location on a stage. We had to build an exterior for it as well. We had to build his yard with all the grass and he's built this little miniature town outside his house. So we built that on the stage as well. And because all of it was on this kind of undulating bit of property in the real world, we had the same topography in the stage. So the set elevated quite a bit. And then we thought, well, now this makes problems getting the techno getting close enough to the techno to reach the entire trailer set. So we thought, well, what if we build the garden on scaffolding that rolls? If we build it on 12 by 12 foot sections of scaffolding that are on rollers, then we can just kind of run blade along the edge of the 12 by 12 section and roll out a chunk of the yard and roll the Technocrane in. So that's what I do. It was just so being able to just float ideas and have everyone brainstorm and go, let's do it like this. Let's really break the mold and do what we needed to do instead of fighting, instead of making compromises. So that was a really great experience. Was the next level there for me was the no compromises approach to what do we need to do to design our world so that the shooting part of it is as easy as it can be.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine that also that's kind of probably the feeling that we all chase getting into filmmaking, which is like the magic part of it, where you're like, I want that to exist, and then it does.
Yeah. Well, that was another big thing for me, with working with Bob. And I don't mean to make this all about Bob Z, but
yeah.
After doing several episodic TV with between and Fish, I was getting pretty tired. These are pretty demanding shows, 23 episodes a year, 9 or 10 months a year, and they're 8-day episodes, and 4 of those days are probably 14-hour days. So it starts to really beat you up. And then on top of that, sometimes you're not dealing with the most experienced directors. So it just, by the time Marwin came along, was getting pretty jaded and pretty beat up by the whole TV thing. And then all of a sudden I was in this world where you could look around the conference table in any prep meeting on Marwin and realize there were fewer people without an Oscar at the table than with.
Sure.
And to look around at everybody in the room and really see that everybody there was helping each other to get to the same goal. And as much as at the time, as much as TV kind of starts out that way, there's always some sort of antagonism that ends up forming, whether it's in or this versus them thing, because I guess people like conflict. Whether it's production and the writers, or production and post-production, but there's always a villain that you have to deal with, and so some sort of motivation to roll your eyes on set all the time. But all of a sudden, now I was in this theatrical feature environment where everybody was trying to do the same thing. Everybody's goal was to make it as good as they possibly could and bring the best out of everybody else. And it was so reaffirming for me, and it really kind of snapped me back into believing that this movie business is, at a certain level, is exactly as you imagine it, that everybody is trying to help everybody to tell the best story they can. And when it's the people that are at that level that demonstrate that to you, that's really, really like life affirming.
Sure.
Knowing that it is that way, at the upper levels for sure.
Yeah. So how did those experiences and lessons from the CW shows affect Brother Son? Because it's similar kind of vibe, kind of a little bit.
Yeah. A lot of similarities. We got Brother Son gave us a chance to. There was a lot of things that were really great about Brother Son. But yeah, we got to take the director Kevin Chancerom that I worked with on Brother, someone that met years before. We'd done Mortal Kombat series together, like a little YouTube thing, and then our paths like several times in and on Flash as well, because he was directing episodes of those. So we'd always gotten along really well. We always knew we wanted to do something of our own together again. So when this came up, Kevin was like, that was the first call. He's like, hey, you got to come down and do this show. So yeah, we got to take a lot of the efficiencies that you develop by doing network TV come in really handy in keeping the momentum going on set, especially on an action oriented show like The Sun. So I was able, it took a little bit of time. I'd never worked in LA before. So it took a little bit of getting accustomed to, there's a different pace of work on set in LA than there is in Vancouver. And I think that's mainly because it's an older business in LA, and it's not, it's rooted still in the days when it did, to do an episode or two. So there's a certain procedure that there's a number.
You said when it did
to go through, like
it chopped out a little bit there. You said when, because it's an older business that what?
That is rooted in the days when there was more time to make an episode or make a movie, like when you weren't trying to do 9 pages in a day. So there's a different pace and a different expectation, I guess, of what the pacing of the crew is meant to be. At first it was driving me a little bit crazy. I'm like, we need to move way fast. It shouldn't take 10 minutes to get something from the truck,
Right.
And so there was a bit of like trying to adapt the pace that I was expecting from doing Arrow and Flash. Eventually we got, which is fine, which is crew that were awesome. And that's the thing about LA is that you're working with members that are second, third, fourth generation in the business. That you don't get anywhere else. Maybe in the UK, but that was really special. That it's so much in the DNA of everything around you, and that was really, really cool. So yeah, a lot of the momentum habits I think that I'd learned and developed on Flash Arrow definitely translated into Brother Son, and I was able to sort of analyzing. Okay, well we're a little bit more methodical on a step by step basis on set. So that means that in order to stay ahead, we deliver ahead in what we're looking at, of the advanced sets that we're looking at. So maybe we stay 3 sets now instead of 2, so they can get, so that they can rig those sets and do whatever they need to do at the pace that they're accustomed to, so that we're getting up. Right. It took a little bit of adjusting. You're always learning how to adapt your skills to a new show, to a new crew, and that sort of thing. That was the first show in a long time on which I didn't have any crew that I knew. Everybody was new to me. So that took a little bit of getting used to, for sure. Luckily, Kevin was someone I'd worked with before, so we could always escape into each other's arms when when things weren't going well. But yeah, and working with our stunt crew was great. Justin Yu was our stunt coordinator, and he's from the gang that did shows like the John Wick series and Fast and the Furious.
Cool,
super great, super talented very established stunt guys, that knew what they were doing. So that helped a lot, not having to, for Kevin not to have to micromanage what he was expecting out of each fight sequence was really great. It was always an embarrassment of riches when we would look at a fight rehearsal and go, wow, that's everything that we wanted.
Can you put that in?
Yeah, exactly. But there was always, and Justin they would always go out of their way and give us a half a dozen extra beats that they'd thought of, which when you're trying to shoot everything in 8 hours is tough. And it's like picking which ones of your children you want to
right.
get rid of, right? There's so many great fight beats that we just simply didn't have time to do, or, and so it's way better to have too many than too few,
Right.
Going back to Lee Grummett, Bob Zemeckis' AD, Lee had a great line. He said, it's always, if you think you might need it, let's just shoot it.
Yeah.
Because it's always better to look at it than to look for it.
That's a
great line.
Yeah.
So that was the thing. Yeah. And then just, once the crew and I had kind of managed to figure each other out and all that, which didn't take long, and just a week or so to really iron out the kinks. It was great, and it felt just like any other show. I felt like that's the one of the great things about movie making is that because it's such a universal language and such a universal way of doing things, after the first kind of acclimatization period, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. You always feel like you're putting on an old pair of gloves by the time you get to week 2, week 3 of a show, and where everybody's just trying to do the same. It's great. It's a real treat to be in a business where you can just go anywhere in the world and kind of slip right in and do your job without having to reinvent the wheel every time.
Totally. So talk to me about the lighting for that show, because I noticed it's does have that kind of blockbustery look. Very somewhere. I know it's not a Marvel show, is it?
No.
Yeah. So it's just like but it still has that kind of like that quality of that look, and especially like kind of what. How much does Netflix have to do with that? Because it kind of does look like, quote unquote, a Netflix show. I imagine I don't know how hands on they are, but what was your approach to lighting thing?
Yeah, they're not. Netflix isn't hands on at all in terms of that. We submit we do a little show and tell at the beginning of a season of a new show with references of what we think it should look like. If we've shot camera tests, we'll present those. Generally, Netflix and folks like Netflix and Apple TV and Amazon are really, really great in the sense that they don't get too micromanagey with how the show looks and how, they're very, and I don't know if that comes from, it's probably a combination of being, a lot of the execs are predominantly IT types and not necessarily movie types, and so I think it's a combination of that, along with a respect. I like to think, maybe it's naive, but I like to think that they have a lot of respect for what the creatives are trying to do on set, and they don't get involved unless something goes egregiously wrong.
Right.
So developing the look for Brother Son, we wanted. I always want to make things look bigger than they I don't want to say deserve to be. I always want to make things look bigger than they could be. I always want to make them feel, a level above. And it Brother Son comes down to the same thing where if we can embrace the imperfections in the lighting, then you get to pull so much more out of it, and not having to light everything perfectly like a TV show and letting it fall off more like it's the theatrical presentation was one of the things we wanted to focus on, and let stuff play in silhouette, let stuff play in the dark, Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of influence, I think, in certain scenes from Flash and Arrow, in terms of there was a lot of amber versus cyan, for example.
I was in the scene, that's going to be question 2.
And the colors they kind of came organically. We didn't want to build a real definitive color palette for the show. We wanted it to be a little bit more fluid than that, and sort of take what it could out of the environments that wherever the show took us, like the story I've been telling a lot lately is the kitchen of Mama Sun's house in the San Gabriel Valley has this really bright amber like street light outside this glass brick wall in the kitchen, to the point where you're kind of like squinting at it. It's so bright, and because the show has so much Asian connotations, I said to Kevin, I'm like, look, this is the character thing for Mama Sun. Like, she's the reason they have this house, this sort of nondescript house in the San Gabriel Valley, is because there's that street light outside the back window, and nobody else in this, in the city wanted to buy this house because of that obnoxious street light, but she got a good deal on it. So
Totally.
we can live with the street light. So that was the motivation for a lot of the lighting in the kitchen sequence,
Yeah.
It was a lot of trying to find environmental ways to justify the lighting and to keep it honest and true to whatever we were trying to do story wise. We did, I don't want to say over stylized, but there's a sequence in which the brothers end up in this exotic animal dealer in the industrial district of LA, and that one we kept kind of dark, and it was full of tanks and stuff like that. So we kind of leaned into Blade Runner-y type influences, and that. So it was fun to be able to just kind of draw from what each location or each set kind of fed us, to determine the lighting. There's a sequence in, I forget which episode it is, 7 or 8, 7 I think, where there's a giant fight sequence in a Chinese restaurant. Mm-hmm. And when we scouted it, we found this one that was all these kind of translucent yellow windows down one side. And we're like, perfect. The whole thing's just, we'll just light it with that.
Yeah.
It was very much environmentally influenced. And one of the things that I always try to do personally is, we talked about things being too perfect and too contrived. I always find myself distracted when stuff is too perfect in terms of lighting or in terms of framing and stuff like that. So what I like to do a lot is introduce some sort of chaos into every sequence. So for example, in a kitchen interior that we're shooting on stage, I always try to put a hot streak of light in somewhere that feels like that little bit of sunlight that you couldn't quite get some grip gear on, because there was a power line or something that you couldn't get in the way. So I find that those little imperfections and that little bit of chaos helps kind of breathe a little bit of life into the lighting of a scene.
Yeah.
And imperfections to me are critical to making stuff feel believable.
So the reason I'm geeking out is because I think in the past, 3, maybe 4 interviews, I have for some reason mentioned that somebody, and I still don't know who, introduced me to the idea of what he called the fuck it light, which is exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, oh, there's someone else who does the fuck it light.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Something that was, because you're always, when you're shooting on a location, the beauty of shooting on locations, against all the inconvenience of shooting on location, is there's always something that you can't control.
Right.
And so that's bringing that into the controlled environment is it makes it, knocks the edge off and makes it feel a little bit more honest. I mean, we built sets on Brother's Son deliberately without wild walls, so that we'd have to kind of force ourselves into a corner sometimes,
Right.
Because that stuff you feel also, on the screen. Sometimes we regretted it, but for the most part, forced us into making it a particular way.
Yeah. And did you have to kind of modulate the way that you approach the look to balance the sort of comedic elements with the action elements, or did you kind of just go with one look and let the script play in there?
Yeah, I think a lot of the fun of the show is that it's so tongue in cheek that personally, Kevin and I were talking about this, and we found it kind of funnier that the comedy plays out in kind of out of context in lighting environments that were way too dramatic, or and it kind of makes it land a little bit harder and makes it a little bit funnier. I think that when when it's not lit like comedy, but it is. It's funny. So yeah, again, it just came down to environments and lighting each environment the way it needed to be, and then blocking it in a way that if we absolutely needed to see somebody's expression, that we made sure that they were in a light source when that beat went down, that kind of thing.
Sure. Were you doing the classic, just have light the space and then just have like some rando key kind of floating around?
Yeah, I tend to light the space and include the key in the environmental light, and then try to influence the blockings to favor that. 85% of the time that worked, and then we bring in a paper lantern or something like that nowadays, yeah, exactly, a little tube, just to get into the eyes, they're great, right? I mean, they're probably the single most influential bit of technology I think that we've had in the last 10 years that's really changed how we do things, yeah, really, really good.
I'm friends with the people at Astera. I guess they listened to the podcast. They ran up on me and they're like, "We like your stuff," and I was like, "That's incredible." Right. But I did this other weird
great
review. Well, I remember when the AX1s came out, me and the guy at Stray Angel, which is a rental house over here, we drove a Fiat onto the stage and we did a poor man's process with the tubes just because because it's a rental house. So we're trying to show how you might use them. And I guess that for like a year, I'd be at some event, and someone would be like, "Hey, have we worked together?" And I'm like, "No, you Googled Astera tubes recently, didn't you?" And I'm like, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, there's been very few things that I can think of that have changed or simplified how we do things as profoundly as those tubes, the Titan tubes, the Helios tubes,
Yeah.
Even things like sky panels and vortexes and stuff, vortices
too.
They're great, but they didn't revolutionize things as much as the tubes. When you can throw something that's battery powered into a corner or just hold it like a lightsaber next to the camera, and dim it down to next to nothing, they're fantastic. They really, really are.
I always wonder if RGB as a technology, not just the tubes, but in general, was one of those things that everyone went, because I remember everyone went, "Oh, we'll never have to gel again." And then that doesn't quite, they don't quite look like that. You end up having to gel, a color temperature regular, what do you want to call that? Panel anyway.
Yeah. I use a lot of tungsten still. I'm a diesel burner. Even on stage, we've yet to, as good as LED technology is, we still haven't quite gotten to, we're getting there, but we haven't quite gotten to the point where you can put up an LED source that behaves like a 20K or a T24, Cineo has the R15. That's a great little light, 100%. But it's still evolving, and it's a great quality of light. It's just the intensity of it isn't quite there yet. And I like big sources outside windows. Because that's how it is in the real world. There's always the biggest source ever outside, and you just can't quite do that with. I mean, you could argue that you could do it with a 5K, or you could do it with an R15, and then bring all your other levels down to match. And my counter argument would be, yes, but you don't get the same quality of light in there. Like if you point an R15 through a set window and skip bounce it off the wall, even if you bring every other light source in the room down to the same level, you still don't get the same life that you would if there was a 20K out that just hammering that.
Yep.
Because there's a breathing that you get from bigger sources that you just don't get from smaller stuff, no matter how you finesse it. It always feels artificial.
Well, and I think we're so used to the idea of like variable ISO and stuff that we forget that the way it looks in reality is probably the way it'll end up, so if it's a soft light on the wall, it's not like, oh, we just set the camera brighter, it'll look exactly the same, because it doesn't. That's not how physics works.
Yes. That's right. And then you get into other compromise. Even if you start messing with ISO, ASA, or whatever, it's EI or whatever it's called now, there's other ramifications to that, right? Like if you're trying to hold exterior highlights, at a practical location, you can't be dumbing down the ISO, because you're losing or you're compromising the sensor's capability of reproducing detail in the highlight.
Right.
So it's so counterintuitive that way, right? Where you want to be at 1600 or 3200 ASA when it's super bright outside.
Right.
So counterintuitive. So yeah, that was a great thing. That was another thing that kind of a rule of thumb that I've always had in the back of my mind. I did the film workshops in Maine many.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
90s. Yeah,
they still do them.
Anyone. Yeah, they're great. And there's nothing like having working professionals teaching the courses, instead of academic types. But Rick Waite had done a lighting and filters course, I think it was, and Rick said, just remember that every decision that you make has to have a reason, has to have a motivation. Whether it's a framing decision, a lighting decision, whatever it is, it has to be motivated by something. And then on the flip side, every decision that you make will have a consequence. So as long as you balance the motivation and the consequence, and balance those as best you can, you'll always be on course. So,
yeah,
that's
a good thing to keep in mind. You could, I'm going to think on that one.
It's all, there's always something. A director will come up and go, "Hey, I want to do it like this," and I always get this kind of. A lot of times, the director gets not impatient, but they're like, "Hey, I want to do it like this. What do you think? What do you think?" And I don't like to give them an immediate, "Oh yeah, that's going to be great" kind of response, because it takes me, maybe it's just because I'm slow, but it takes me a few minutes to kind of cycle through. Okay, this is what he wants to do. What is that going to mean 3 shots from now? Like if we do it like that, then what are the consequences of that? When we turn around, is it going to box us into a corner? So sometimes directors get not frustrated, but they're like, are you listening to what I'm saying? Like, yes, but I'm digesting what you're saying so that we don't have to, struggle with this later. Let's just think about it for a sec. So I'm always kind of slow to react to things, and I like to kind of in my head work through all the steps of what is this going to mean downhill from here. And what's sure, it might be great for this shot, but it could really handcuff us, on the turnaround or down the road.
I did want to, because we're kind of coming up on time, I did want to pivot quickly to Still, because I fucking loved that documentary, and
wasn't it great? Yeah,
dude, incredible. And I left it going, they fucking nailed the mixing the footage with the archival and all that. I was just floored. Walk me through how, because I know there was 3 DPs on that, so I know your contribution was different than theirs. But walk me through that, and then you did the narrative stuff, right? Or
I did the narrative stuff, yeah. The reenactment, or what do they call it? The scripted stuff.
Yeah. How the fuck did you pull that? Because that stuff looks exact.
I got in trouble for saying this over and over we did an ASC clubhouse conversation about this, and that question came up. How do we make it all work? And my sort of standard answer was, I came in really late on that show. They'd already cut the whole movie, other than the stuff that we had to shoot. So I was just painting my numbers and going, okay, we have the 5th shot in here that does this, and there's a
second unit shit,
and there's yeah. So so in many ways, that show had defined itself long before I came along. And the editor, Michael, his last name escapes me right now, was the one who kind of, between him and Davis, came up with the idea of how it was cut, how it was going to end up being cut. Almost accidentally, I think the story that I heard was that Michael was looking through archival footage, just looking for stuff that he could use. But at the same time, he was listening to the audio from from some of the interview footage that that Julia and
Claire.
Oh my, Claire had shot, and he found himself going, that voiceover from the interviews is perfect over this bit of archival stuff. And he's like, what if we told the story like with the archival? So that's how it kind of developed.
Gotcha.
And then by the time I came along, we were just filling in the blanks and making sure that we had that sort of important personal stuff, like the human story part of it,
right,
sussed out and shot the way that Davis wanted. So yeah, there were lots of storyboards. Davis is an incredible collaborator and just an unbelievable human being, which is true of pretty much everyone that had anything to do with that show. And the whole thing was super easy. We had open and frank discussion about every aspect of it. If you want, he had boards, and we looked at the boards, and we talked about, hey, what if we do it like this? What if we do it like that? And switched them up. And he was never, unwilling or to listen to other ideas.
Right.
But when he felt strongly about something, we stuck to it. And it was a real special experience. I think we had 20 days or 22 to shoot the narrative stuff. And it was fun. It was a lot of fun. Recreating all those, that Back to the Future stuff was great. And what is his childhood stuff, growing up, that wasn't recreation, but it was great. It was a lot of fun to sort of experiment with time periods and play around, and really have some fun.
Yeah, because I guess I didn't think about it, but I was like, you don't even have to reference other stuff. You can literally just reference the thing you're matching to. just make
yeah. And the Back to the Future stuff, to how Dean Cundy shot it originally and sort of guessed at gel colors and stuff, and that worked out pretty well. We did a lot of that on blue screen.
Oh, no kidding.
The walk down through the circus, or through base camp toward the set. That was all. It was a practical location, but we had blue screen up so that they could extend the set.
No kidding. I would never have guessed.
Right. But yeah, I mean, it was such a geeky kind of honor in a way to be able to recreate just a little slice of that stuff that's so iconic, that's in all of our memories. So, yeah.
Well, and that's also another shout. I always like to shout out when they deserve it. Production designing and costuming, because I mean, they fucking nailed it.
Yeah, really nailed it. I mean, the costumes, and again, Davis is uncompromising in that regard. It's like the orange vest, the life jacket has to be the life jacket, right, or the life vest, so it wasn't without some turmoil getting, making sure everything was just right. But, you see the result, and it's, those are the things you need to stick to, right? Is making sure the devil's in the details, really, in all aspects of filmmaking. And that's what people, I don't want to say details are what people remember, but details are the kind of cement that make everything that much more believable.
Yeah.
That close the sale, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, that's something I've always told students is like, hey, if you're going to shoot this film, don't just do it in your apartment. No one's going to believe 18-year-old girl lives in your fucking 22-year-old boy apartment. That'll really kill it. I did quickly want to ask before I let you go. What made you choose the movie cam lenses? The Ari, for people who don't know, Ari has these like vintage lenses that are really cool. But what made you choose those? Was it just convenience and kind of vintaginess, or had you tested them and they were perfect?
Yeah, I had actually just come off of a movie that we used. In fact, we're using them on the movie right now.
Oh no shit.
I'm in love with those lenses. There's just something about them. Again, part of it harkens back to being imperfect. They're not perfect lenses, and I don't want to go down that cliche road of, we want these lenses that are, character, all that nonsense. Sure. I mean, great. If you're doing a dream sequence, great. Have lenses that don't resolve from edge to edge. But there's just something about these ones that have a really great kind of late 80s, early 90s feel to them. They're contrasty, but not too contrasty. They don't, they don't behave like Zeiss primes, for example, in terms of contrast. They're a little bit milkier and a little bit kinder. They're a little bit more nostalgic, I think, in a way. They're a little warmer than Zeiss primes are. And I don't mean to keep calling out Zeiss prime, but they're Zeiss.
That's a standard
predominant.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they were what we used a lot in the 80s and 90s, right? Because they were fast and everything. But the movie cams, they just have a wonderful texture to them that I really, really like. And when you flare them, they have this beautiful kind of on Golden Pond kind of sensibility about them, where they have this warm kind of veiling flare. I've been developing a kind of a riff on the Varicon with Arri over the last few years, so that we can tint shadows not only across the entire frame, but in corner of the frame. So you'll see that kind of come into play on a movie like Still. Actually, Brother Sun, we used them a lot. And the movie cam primes, because of their warm flare tendencies, when you put a kind of a cooler Varicon sort of flare into the shadows, they balance so nicely, and they just feel, there's something about them that feels really great. I mean, it's hard to quantify it beyond, in a physical sense, but they're just great lenses that do a great job, that happen to be lifted almost directly out of the late 80s and rehoused in new barrels for the large format cameras.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'll have to. We'll have to have you back on to literally just nerd out about the Varicon thing, because I've been. That's a conversation for a long. I wanted one of those so badly when I first got started. For some reason, I was just like, I think that'll solve all my problems. Or like have like cheaper cameras.
Yeah, well, I mean, coming from the film days when you'd have to get that great big Panavision thing out to fog the neg, basically, right, and tint your shadows. It's sort of the same idea, except you do it right in the matte box. And the one that we're building allows you to do it in a corner of like there's 64 LEDs around the filter tray.
Got it.
And they're all RGBW, and you can move them around in two separate sections. So you can put a little, old amber flare in the top right of the frame and a blue one in the bottom left, independent of one another, and move them around and do so. So it's something that we're just kind of playing around with, but it's super fun. Yeah. Anytime you want to talk about it.
Hell yeah. Well, thanks so much for spending the time with me, man. That was great chat. And like I said, I'm
my pleasure.
Itching to have you back on to talk about that. And also the film you're working on now. That'll be
for sure.
Cool.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Well, I'll let you go and have a great rest of your day, man.
Thanks so much, Kenny. Appreciate it.
Yep. Take care.
Talk to you soon.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. Produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by Pro Video Coalition. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can go to frameandrefpod.com and follow the link to buy me a coffee. It's always appreciated, and as always, thanks for listening.